Thank you, Victoria, and hello everybody and welcome. I'm pleased to say we have created this Hangout especially for our European members and stakeholders every Wednesday at 3 p.m. UK time, and on the hottest day of the year so far in the UK, but apparently quite normal for Texas, so Victoria tells me, and 4 p.m. Central European time, and hopefully just in time for some of our US attendants early on as they get their cups of coffee. Now, this is our 9th European Hangout. We have a planned program of various topics on an internationally wide basis with the aim that these conversations and hangouts will help enrich everyone in this current environment. Now, apart from today, we will have one more hangout this season, this time next week with Michael from HotStats, and the topic of the European hotel trends and a review of the state of play in Europe. What is the emerging view direct from the profit and loss account? And I am delighted to say we will return on September the 16th, which is a Wednesday at 3 p.m, with Michael Levy, CEO of Citizen M, and of course, current HFTP president, who started us off in April. And we're going to have a chat with Michael to see what's happened in the intervening months and what he's learned since they went into lockdown mode. If, however, you have any topics or suggestions, then please do let us know. I should also point out there are already 4 recordings from our previous European Hangouts via our resources page via our main Hangouts page. Now, today's discussion will be another interesting aspect of lockdown in our industry. What is the point of revenue management when there is no revenue? But who is Klaus Kohlmayr? Well, I think I've known Klaus since 2006. He is Chief Evangelist at IDeaS. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Hotel Management, has studied business at Henley Management College, amongst other qualifications. He was with IHG in Asia Pacific for over 6 years, ending up as their Director of Revenue Management for the whole of Asia Pacific. He's been a social media strategist and a head of partnerships, and he even started up the IDeaS Global Consulting Division and led teams that partnered with leading hotel companies. Based in Minneapolis, and in his current role as Chief Evangelist for IDeaS, Klaus aims to challenge existing thought processes, creating stimulating conversations and helping to bring to life the future of revenue management and pricing in hospitality travel. So he's perfect for our European Hangout. Now, Klaus doesn't have any slides today, but I do suggest if you want to get full view of Klaus, then you go to the speaker view in the top right of the Zoom menu. Klaus, over to you.
Thank you, Carl, and thanks everyone for having me on here. Always great to speak to my European and broader audience. As a European myself, obviously, very close to my heart. Chief Evangelist means bringing the good news about whatever subject you're talking about. So I'm going to try and bring some good news about the subject and revenue management and pricing to everyone. This is a hangout, so I didn't bring any slides because when you get a bunch of people together to have a conversation, you don't show up with a PowerPoint and a laptop, right? But I do see some very familiar faces on the participant list here, so I'm sure, and I know who is going to speak up and start asking questions very, very soon. I'm not going to mention any name, but I will see if I'm right or not. I did want to talk about the value of revenue management in times of lockdown. Revenues have lockdown as well in many instances around the world, and we as a company and the industry is asking questions about what is the value of revenue management and the value of a revenue management system or automated processes in times like these. So I want to make this very interactive. I have some structure in my head that I can turn upside down. I'm looking forward to just a good, stimulating, hopefully challenging, controversial conversation. And I know the IDeaS folks who are on the call are going to keep me honest as well and interfere if I say anything that's not right, which I hope is not going to happen. So let me start off with saying first that obviously it's been very challenging for the whole industry. You know, I've been in the industry for since I was 15 years old when I started my hotel management school in Austria. And it's been very, very heartbreaking for me to see so many people and so many friends of mine furloughed, laid off, going through salary cuts and all the likes. So it's a very, very emotional time for everyone. Apart from all the revenue and business impact, just from a human impact, it's been pretty devastating. And I hope all the people that have been left without a job or less work are going to get back on track fairly soon as recovery starts to kick in. From a revenue management perspective, there is a couple things that I want to go through. I want to start off with data, and then I want to move into forecasting, and I want to then talk about pricing and kind of the traditional revenue management system approaches versus modern revenue management system approaches. And then talk about distribution and more of the commercial areas that we see converging very, very quickly. So there's kind of a theme to that, starting on its most basic level with data and the importance of having good data in times like these. So that's my plan, and I can flip that upside down or sideways anytime you would like, or anytime someone wants to interject. So let me start off kind of with what we're seeing right now in terms of our own data, and then what revenue management can do in times of like these with data, and why it's important to still have technology in place. Obviously, occupancy levels and revenue levels are down everywhere. There is some encouraging signs in many parts of the world. I just got off a call with a big brand, one of the major brands, and their head of revenue management in Asia Pacific in China, and we were talking about recovery in China, and we're talking about which markets are seeing recovery and which markets are maybe going now into a second wave like Beijing. We see a recovery coming, or business coming back. And they were mentioning in China, for example, 70%, some of their cities are running at 70, 80%. So we're using kind of data, particularly around China, to drive decisions and to drive strategy for other countries. So while we're all looking at maybe 20% or 30% in Europe, or 40% occupancies in the US, it is really critical to understand what is going on. And for us, the only way you really understand what is going on with your data and those changes that are happening is if you have the right tools in place. And because things are changing so fast, it is really, really critical that you have the right tools in place that help you make decisions very quickly and very automated, because otherwise you're going to lose out opportunities. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. So the revenues are obviously very down a lot, but as we're seeing these percentage increases, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% increases and accelerating, there are opportunities to use the data and form a picture about, I don't want to say new normal, but I hate the word, but just the normal going forward. So when you look at your hotel and when you look at your market, you need to understand what has changed, first of all, in your competitive market or in your market dynamics. Who are the competitors that are still around, first of all? What are those competitors doing? How is your market segmentation shifted? What are the patterns that have changed? And we're seeing some dramatic changes in patterns of how people make reservations, and how these trends are evolving. So there's a fundamental shift happening in the industry that is probably going to persist for quite a long time. For example, we know that people don't want to buy any advanced purchase rates anymore. So advanced purchase rates for the moment have gone out the window, and pretty much every company that I know is now focusing on the best available rate being their entry rate, plus any promotional activities that we're starting to see. So your traditional rate structure is very different now than it was a few months ago. People are making short-term bookings, which means that we've heard of hotels that have gone from 10% occupancy to 70% occupancy within a 72-hour window. And that is very, very short term before arrival, which obviously puts some strains on the operations of a hotel as well. If you all of a sudden end up 70% with a 48-hour window before people start to arrive on the weekend, and you're unable to staff your hotel at 100% or fully, because most of the people are furloughed or have been let go. So we're seeing a very short-term pickup window, very short pickup windows, usually 7 days to 10 days. We're seeing length of stays and probably expanding in some markets, decreasing in other markets. Traditionally, we know that the long stay segment and the extended stay segment of the industry has done pretty well, especially in the US, has held up fairly robust. Some of the brands have come out and said they've continued to run at 60, 70% in the extended stay segment. So we know there's still people traveling, but pace has changed, flexibility has increased, And some markets are starting to think about a equal or better, or some segments, I would say, are starting to think about an equal or better performance than last year, especially in the leisure market. I had conversations with the head of sales and marketing of a company called Delaware North just recently, and we posted that podcast last week on our website. And Delaware North has 55,000 people in airport restaurants, hotels, predominantly national parks and water parks, and stadiums. They're serving food in sports stadiums. And he told me that obviously that the last couple of months have been very, very difficult, but he's very encouraged and very positive of what he sees for his hotels that are located in national parks or close to national parks. Obviously, some of these hotels are fairly restricted. They can only take 25 or 50% of a normal volume. But in many cases, those 25 or 50% have been taken up already, even with some people accepting advance purchase payment, which is probably a rarity. So I think when we talk about the leisure market, we talk about the short distance market, that they describe it as 5 to 6 hours driving, at least in the US. We see business coming back. People are wanting to go out. People are tired of lockdowns, and people are happy to get in the car and drive across borders and stay for a weekend, even if it's a short-term decision. So all of that, you have your market segmentation changes, you have your market changes, you have your competitor changes, you have distribution changes because people prefer direct versus indirect to a certain extent. All of that gives you a lot of data that you need to look at and understand to make the right decisions. And especially, I believe, in an environment where you only maybe have 20, 30, or 40% occupancy, that extra 1% of revenue or 2% of revenue that you will get if you have a thorough, strategic process in place backed with the right tools will make or break your profitability, because we all know that costs are that the margins are very depressed and costs are increasing with the additional requirement on health and safety and cleaning of your hotels. So from a data perspective, there is a lot of data that hotels need to look at. The market has significantly shifted. I was talking to the CEO of Remington a couple months back, Sloan Dean, and he said he sees it as day zero of his business. He's not looking at what has been in February or what has been in January. He's like, this is a new business. This is just like we're starting up 80 hotels at the same time, and we're budgeting and we're forecasting from zero, just like we would if we would open up every hotel from scratch. And in order to do that, you need to have good data, and you need to have good insights, and you need to have the right tools. So even in times like these, where you have very little revenues potentially to manage in a traditional sense, you do have a lot of data that you need to look at, and you need to have the right tools in place that can ingest that data and put it into one place and help you make the right decisions. So the first tick here is get a tool or use the tool, whatever you use, call it a BI tool, a revenue management tool, and a forecasting tool, but get a tool that allows you to look at the data in one place, that ingests data from different suppliers. Like we ingest data from STR, we ingest data from TravelClick, we ingest data from reputation management companies or OTA Insight, put all that into one place to help a person at a hotel. If the revenue manager is still around, great. If not, then somebody else at the hotel to make the right decisions. So the data is critical. The market has shifted. This is a new world we're living in from a revenue and market perspective. And you need to have a tool in place that allows you to put all that data into one place and help you make the right decision, the right strategy. So that's my first bucket of why do you need technology to help you with that? Because it's not becoming less complicated, it's becoming more complicated. And Carl, I don't know if anyone asked any questions. Should I just address them, or do you want to call them out and we'll do that later? It's just
we'll do the questions a bit later on,
yeah.
Klaus. If you go for another 10, 20,
yeah.
10, 15 minutes, and then we'll do the questions.
And so the second part is, if you have good data in place and you kind of know what's going on in your market, you do need to forecast what your business is going to look like. And with the demand coming in shorter and shorter bursts, I would call it, People are looking at government's regulations, people are looking at COVID cases and rates of transmissions, and they're making decisions based on all these data inputs that they're getting personally. And then they decide, am I going to go, today is Wednesday, am I going to go this weekend to across the border or go on a trip, or am I going to stay home? So forecasting is becoming much more and more dynamic. It's becoming more and more, it fluctuates more and more. And it's becoming way more frequent than we used to. I was talking to a chief commercial officer of one of the, I would say, mid-size luxury chains in the US recently. And he said, forget about looking any way beyond 60 days right now. He said in April and March, we looked at the next 30 days. Now we're starting to look at the next 60 days. Maybe in September, we can look at the next 90 days. And then we're not even going to do a budget for next year. We're just going to do a rolling 30-day or 90-day forecast, because who can do a budget in these times when you don't even know what's going to happen in 90 days, right? So we're over the next 18 months, we're in an area of rapid iterative forecasting to more stakeholders than in the past, because now it's not just your general manager who wants to see the forecast, it's the owners, it's the banks, it's anyone else, the asset manager. There's a lot more people that want to see what's going on with your business more often than in the past. So you have to have the right data in the right place, and then you have to have a good tool that helps you make these forecasting decisions, both from a revenue perspective, a revenue management perspective, and from an operational perspective. So pulling all that together is going to be critical, and good luck doing that on Excel when somebody calls you every couple of days and says, can you just reforecast the next 90 days for me very quickly, because I'm going into an investors meeting. It's going to be very, very heart-wrecking, I would say. And Andy from Delaware North last week, he told me on that podcast, he said, we would have been in a world of hurt if we wouldn't have spent the last 3 days integrating all of our systems and making sure that all the data flows freely between the different components that we have. It would have been very, very difficult for us to stay on tap. So forecasting is critical from a revenue management perspective. The forecasts obviously fluctuate wildly. This is the time, and we've always stressed that, to have the revenue manager or the person managing revenues work with the system. There's things that the system just can't know. If border restrictions have been lifted all of a sudden on a Friday night, and everyone starts traveling and getting into the car on Saturday morning, that's not something the system can know. So somebody needs to work with the system and interact with the system. But in general, for the longer term forecast and for revenue management forecasting for 60, 90 days out, we have seen actually the systems being quite robust. We've made a lot of changes in our algorithms. We've worked very closely with our 13,000 hotels around the world. We were in a lucky position that we haven't furloughed anyone, and we haven't let anyone go. We're 100% staffed. And we've worked very closely to making sure that the mathematics and the science and the background, the algorithms work correctly, even in times of higher uncertainty. So forecasting, very, very critical, even more critical than in the past. Then it comes to the pricing and inventory management decisions, which are I guess the third component of that. I mentioned that before, when you have very little revenue, and you may be constrained by government regulations to only be able to fill your hotel at 50%, you do need to manage and price your 50% occupancy that you can take still accurately. You need to understand how your competitive set is reacting. You need to understand how your market is reacting. You need to understand what your opportunities are, even within the 50% or the 25% you can take. And we have found that, and actually I was just talking to someone before this call, and he told me he had looked at a OTA Insight market report. And there were a list of hotels in a market in the US, and he could see the difference between a hotel with a revenue management system, where the hotel priced by day very dynamically, and hotels that didn't have a revenue management system that were very static in their pricing, independent of occupancy, independent of forecast, maybe a little bit of a variation between weekend and weekdays. But the hotels that didn't have a revenue management system were clearly losing out in those tiny micro adjustments in your price, versus a hotel that had a revenue management system that was automatically adjusting the price according to the bookings as they came in. So pricing is still critical, even if it's even more critical if you only have a smaller amount of revenue to play with, because the flow through is going to be significant, and obviously everyone wants to cover at least their cost. When we talk about pricing internally, we also talk about not just pricing in general, your rates. We price by room type, we price by product. We make sure that each of the products that you put out on the shelf, be it on direct or indirect, is actually priced on its own merit. So in times like these, where hotels start running promotions, where they may be starting to get hammered by Expedia or Booking for special promotions or special discounts or special packages, it is critical to understand what the impact is going to be on those. So again, relying on the data, understanding your sensitivity by product, understanding how many people would potentially trade from a standard room to a superior room to a deluxe room. What is your overall demand, and how to price that is absolutely critical, even in times where you have smaller demand. I would argue even more so. So when it comes to distribution, which is the last bit for me, is so when you then put these products out on the shelf, obviously you want to make sure that in many instances we've seen hotels are the customer wanting to be dealing more direct with hotels rather than going through a third party. And I think that's just a reflection of people wanting to know what's available in the hotel. I've stayed a couple times in hotels now, and the first thing I do is look at what's open, what are the services, what are the sanitary measures that you're taking, how confident can I be to be at the hotel, and that you only get that information dealing directly with the hotel at this time. So we're seeing a stronger performance in direct channels versus indirect channels. You want to make sure you're properly positioned there, and you want to make sure that any requests for promotions coming from third-party channels are taken with enough enough careful approach, so you're not starting to rely and over-index on the OTAs, that you become too dependent on them, which is what we have seen in 2008. In 2008, a lot of over-dependency were created by people just signing up with OTAs and allowing them to generate a lot of demand for their hotels, which in the short term maybe was positive, but in the longer term definitely wasn't positive for them. So on the distribution side, again, you need to understand your cost of distribution, your cost by channel. You need to understand your sensitivity by channel, which a tool and a system will help you understand better than an Excel spreadsheet can. And the last part, just to wrap up, what we have seen and what we've started to talk about actually last year was that a traditional revenue management approach, maybe, if this would have been 15 years ago, we would have said, yeah, probably a revenue management system is not as relevant right now, because it's not, inventory. You can't change your prices only when you're busy, because you're not busy anymore. But the modern revenue management systems now, it's about dynamic pricing. It's about understanding your data. It's about but optimizing your prices on a day-to-day basis, even in times of low demand or lower demand. So the traditional approach to revenue management 15 years ago is no longer what we have today. Today we have these very sophisticated, automated, artificial intelligence-driven systems that just make sure your price is optimized every single day, independently of your occupancy levels. Obviously, the higher your occupancy, the more aggressive the system will get. But even in times of 20 or 30%, there is still room to adjust your pricing based on the business that's coming in. So what we have seen is the expansion of revenue management into more of a commercial platforms and commercial systems. So revenue management now connects and influences with sales, with marketing, with other revenue streams, food and beverage and meetings, and with distribution, to have more of the right guidance and the right strategies in place from a commercial leadership perspective, rather than just a revenue manager. So in the again, 10, 15 years ago, there was one guy sitting in a hotel looking at a spreadsheet and crunching the numbers. Now we have commercial leaders, and many of them are now CEOs, like Sloan Dean at Remington. He used to be a head of revenue management for Interstate a long time ago. We now see commercial leaders and CEOs wanting to understand how they can affect the levers across price distribution, sales, marketing, and do that for all of their revenues, not just for room revenues. So we see an expansion of revenue management in scope, away from just this traditional thought of revenue management in one area to an all encompassing business engine, which has been very interesting. It's been accelerating actually over the last few months through the pandemic. So I hope that's that was a kind of a quick introduction, going from data to forecasting to pricing to distribution, and then this commercial view of revenue management, or this commercial convergence of revenue management. And I spoke exactly 30 minutes, so which is kind of the plan, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well done, Klaus. Thank you very much. Right. I think you may have answered this question, but I'm going to let Timo ask his question, because he's got the obvious question here in some ways. Timo, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Timo, hi.
That's fine. Hi, Klaus. So my question really is, if I'm now reopening a hotel after the shutdown, and like the CEO you mentioned said, it is the beginning of a new hotel company which is starting up now. So how can I, as an operator, be confident that the algorithms any revenue management system uses to calculate demand patterns and pricing and optimal price points, that they do make the right recommendations or decisions for me, because the revenue management systems and the algorithms in it have never seen the current demand pattern before. So how can I be confident that I do get the right answers from the RMS? That's my question.
Yeah, the first part is, I guess the first question is your pricing structure, and how has your general pricing structure changed, right? Independent from the system, what changes have you made to your general strategy, pricing strategy, right? Have you made any significant changes, or have you maybe adjusted them slightly and you're still working within kind of a similar structure than before? And the reason why I say that is because what we have done in our systems is we have we look at probably pretty much all of the hotels on a regular basis, and look at how the system is reacting to these individual, regional, and country, and even city-specific changes that are happening. From a data perspective, we have traditionally weighted kind of the past that is further out a little bit higher than the most recent, or actually the most recent past a little bit higher than the past that is further out. And we've changed that to say, well, look at the last few 60 days, 80 days, whatever it is, the most appropriate moment. Look at the new patterns that have happened since March. Look at obviously the out of order rooms, and look at your market segmentation changes, and look at your distribution changes, and over index the period that we have seen most recently versus the period of 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So whereas the traditional revenue management approach would look at, well, let's look at last 18 months or 2 years, we've said, well, we should look at the most recent past and learn from that as quickly as possible. And just to give an indication, when we open a new hotel, or when a new hotel installs our system, or we put it in, the system takes the most recent, it can take budget information, so that is one input, or forecast information, and use that as a benchmark or as a baseline. And then the system very quickly learns as the hotel opens how the pattern is going to be established when the hotel is opening. So if you look at your hotel being a new hotel, or every hotel that's opening is a new hotel, we have mechanisms in place that allow the system, just like when we put in our system into a new hotel, that learns very quickly from the most recent past and applies these patterns from the most recent past to the future. And if that then changes again, then the system will pick that up and make the necessary adjustments. So we have these mechanisms in place, just like we would do when we put the system into a new hotel. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I'm kind of a older generation already, and revenue management systems in the past were taught to me that actually you need to have a minimum kind of occupancy, so that they're really optimize your revenue and your occupancy. So is that still valid, or is that no longer valid? Can I live with those micro changes you explained?
No, it is less valid than before. As I said, when occupancy gets very high and very tight and you have a lot of compression, the system will obviously price more aggressively. But if you have a hotel that's only running at 30% or 40%, the modern systems and the technology that we have, which we call continuous pricing or agile pricing, these are just marketing terms, but technology terms. It is actually dynamically pricing within the demand that you have. So even in a scenario where you have 20 or 30%, if the demand moves from 20 to 25%, the system will see that and say, hey, there is something that I can do to maximize that extra 5%. Or if the system knows that you have 50% of the rooms out of order and your actual potential occupancy could never be beyond 50%, the system will look at that and say, oh, what can I do with that 50% that I have available to sell, and how do I optimize within that? So the traditional notion of, oh, it's just a revenue management system only works when you're more than 75%, that's no longer relevant, or it's no longer critical in modern revenue management systems. I think there's still some out there, traditional revenue management systems that still take that approach, but we don't.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. Great.
Okay, Stephanie, you've got a sort of trend kind of question, I suppose, or OTAs related.
Well, one of the surprising aspects that I've seen in Spain is that a lot of properties are offering all the benefits that usually OTAs used to offer. One of them was the last minute cancellation, which used to be in hotels almost a curse. And now it is really widely offered in Spain. As you mentioned, we are speaking now about a much more national base of guests, and therefore I have the feeling that the relationship between properties and guests is becoming much more important, because guests are calling properties to check what is available, what security measures they have taken, etc. And I was wondering if you think that this is a trend, if it is a sustainable trend, because at the end of the day, not being able to forecast your distribution channel is probably one of the most difficult points at that stage.
Well, I think it's up to the industry to make this a trend. It's a very good observation. It's absolutely true that as I said, I've stayed twice in hotels over the last 6 weeks, and I must say, I've been very disappointed by the lack of information I actually got from the hotel on their website. They were still talking, and I just stayed in a hotel last week, and they were talking about, how they're perfect for weddings, and and how their restaurants and their pool and nothing had changed on their website that told me actually the information that I needed to have, which is your restaurant open? What do you have, any special check-in times or checkout times that are different? What is happening to all your facilities in your hotel? There was nothing on the website that told me what I actually wanted to know. So I think the industry has a great opportunity to create a much closer relationship between the customer and the hotel. I don't know if many hotels are taking advantage of that opportunity today. I haven't seen a lot of hotels, and I know there are, but I haven't seen any hotels yet that have done it really well, where they have just changed their whole website approach and said, here's all the stuff that's happening in our hotel. So the opportunity is there to create that very direct relationship. You're absolutely right. People don't want, I think there is still $4 billion of unrefundable fees out there that people have to use in the next 18 months. So a lot of people don't want to go through the pre-purchase and the deposit process, because maybe they still have leftover money that they have to spend anyway, but they have heard horror stories from their friends and family about how they are not able to get the money back, and they have to use it in some foreign country that they might not even be able to get back to, right? So people don't want to lock themselves in. They don't want to go through the advanced purchase process. They don't want to leave deposits. They want to have the flexibility, and kudos to the hotel industry. They've changed very quickly, and they've made basically all the rates fully flexible right now. And I hope that the industry will take better advantage of that and create this long-lasting relationship between the customer and the hotels.
Great, thank you, Klaus. Pablo Torres, you have a question, which is, I think, a classic for practicing revenue managers. Pablo, do you like to put your question to Klaus?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I've been hearing in so many webinars now, like most people are thinking about dropping rates, you know, and it is kind of panic mode from some revenue managers in terms of dropping rates. So how is that going to, the system, the RMS, going to react when the revenue manager tries to override rates again and again to drop them?
Well, the system, you know, we have functionality in our system that when a revenue manager touches the keyboard, it gives you an electric shock. And we've just rolled that out over the last 6 weeks. Just kidding. You know, as I said, Pablo, you know, this is a time to work with the system, right? The system can't know everything. Obviously, you know, in general times, people always try and second guess a technology. And some hotels just override the system more frequently than others. We've done some research around that in the past, and we found that the system works the best when the revenue man and machine come together and they work together. And when something happens that the system just can't know because it's just happened and it hasn't been, you know, picked up in the data yet, then it's to the revenue manager to say, well, something has changed. I'm going to, you know, make some changes to your forecasted segmentation or forecasted bookings, right? So overrides are not bad if it's telling the system something that the system just can't know at this point in time. Well, as the system then understands what's happening, then you can take these away. But it is not a bad thing per se. It's just when people continuously don't override what the system is saying, then why don't they just pick up the phone and say, hey, I think, you know, something is not right with my forecast. Can you guys, IDeaS, somebody else, can you guys look at it and tell me if there is something that the system hasn't picked up yet, right? So it is, I would say general overrides or working with the system is critical in these times. And that's what we recommend to all of our clients. Thanks, Pablo. Always good to hear from you.
Paul West, you've got a question. I'll let you ask it rather than me read it out.
Yeah, well, it's sort of, I was thinking, you know, back how, let me try to sum it up a little bit better, actually. This is different, but than 9/11. We got to bring that up. It was a complete shutdown, unexpected. And you sort of maybe had more of a clear sight as to when things might be back functioning. Now, it's not so much maybe. You might have, not only you don't have a clear time frame, you might have a reoccurrence. I mean, we're going to come back around. It's going to be just general flu season in the fall, early winter, where that's going to be a freaky situation where everyone's sneezing and coughing, whether it's COVID or not. So, you know, I'm just, you know, so I'm wondering, like, where is it after, what can you learn from this, or can you apply? Post 9/11, it was like, well, okay, we dropped the rates, but no, there was a big push to keep the rates up. And yet, you know, where is that now? Because of course that was a long time ago, so revenue systems are more advanced. And you rightly put out, somebody has to be in there managing it daily, as you say, if they change the border crossing overnight and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not sure. As I usually do, I put a bunch of stuff out there and not so much a question, but I like to hear your feedback.
Yeah, so first of all, to recovery, you know, my opinion at the moment is, you know, 23, 24. That's kind of the consensus at the moment, where we look at RevPARs that are similar to 2019 on a global level. I think personally, recovery, there's not going to be one recovery. There's going to be thousands of mini recoveries, you know, in different countries at different times, or even in different locations at different times. Like we've just seen Beijing, right, going through a, you know, some recurrence now that they call a second wave, or people in China call a second wave. And we're looking closely kind of what that means at the moment. Even this morning, as I mentioned, I was on a call with some people in China. So I think it's going to be much more granular and much more market driven as markets open, close, change the rules. countries open borders, close borders, put restrictions in place. So I don't think you can't speak of a global recovery. It's going to be a market recovery, right? First of all. I think people, I feel, and what we see in our hotels, the 13,000 hotels that we support, I feel people are more disciplined than in the past at the moment. We don't see that aggressive rate dropping that we've seen in the past. We see a much more disciplined approach. We see packages being implemented and rolled out that are temporary, like a recovery or bounce back package or some very specific promotion that is specific, not just in length of term, but also for a specific market, to attract that very specific customer group that particular businesses things will react the fastest. So I think people become much more sophisticated, and it's because it's data driven. Tomorrow we're going to release a podcast of me talking to the head of sales and marketing of Campgrounds of America. And we talked about the recovery, and it was quite interesting. Campgrounds of America, they have 500 campgrounds in the US and Canada. And they did a whole research effort in April and March to understand their 2020 customers and how that's changed from 2019. And not to give too much away, but they have found that instead of 8 to 10 people traveling, it's going to be 4 or 5 people traveling. Instead of people driving from coast to coast, it's going to be 4 or 5 hours within a 4 and 5 hour destination. They feel that people still can make advanced purchase decisions, but it's within a 10 to 2 week time frame rather than 3 week or 5 week time frame. And they have created packages very specific based on the research and the data that they have gathered. So it's become a much more data driven and much more sophisticated, and I would say much more structured approach than in the past.
Right.
I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, fair enough.
Klaus, just to build on that question, and also to build on Stephanie's question from another angle, you talked about the fact that advanced rate purchases have dropped away because nobody's doing that because of looking too far forward. Do you think that advanced rate purchase will come back, or is it a function of when the industry gets to a certain percentage of revenue, then they will start to bring back in and demand level of that, and then advanced rates will come back in, and will that be an indication of that the market's getting better, so to speak?
I'm not sure if it's an indication that the market's getting better. I think it's an indication that people will feel more comfortable and more secure to make longer term decisions. And that's just when there's some stability coming back, and you might have these green corridors established between New Zealand and Australia, for example, right, who both countries have done pretty well, then people will look at, hey, maybe I can book something further out, and I'm feeling confident that I'm not going to lose my deposit, or I can actually use my deposit. So I think that's one aspect, but I think hotel companies also have, or the industry has, an opportunity to make things a little bit more creative and innovative, right? Rather than just having advanced packages, maybe there's a combination of different things, right? I've seen some companies starting to play around with subscription services, which is also an interesting kind of concept that in the industry has been talked about for a while, but we haven't really seen. And now we see a couple companies starting to play around with that, right? So maybe there's some innovative new approaches to pricing that we'll see, and we'll see how that plays out then.
Yeah, one of the comments I've heard is, the customer will become that much more important, and we've got to find ways to make that apparent to them one way or the other. There's a question here from somebody called Neil Kaur. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I've heard
Neil. Neil, do you want? I think it's similar to Paul's question about 9/11, but a bit later on.
Yeah, no, I think Paul said what I wanted to say, really, because when we look back at Ebola and SARS and 9/11 and even the economic crash in 2008, a lot of questions were around what use is it modelling those exercises, because I think Paul spoke to the health component. It's pretty unprecedented, the most notably used word during the COVID-19 crisis, but trying to model what would happen and then a second wave. So I think it's kind of been addressed by Klaus really. I don't know if there's anything to add on that in terms of micro recoveries and multiple recoveries. So I think it's probably a bit crude to think about one overall recovery. But there was a nice theme around staycations, provided, as UK hotels open on the 4th of July, will we start to see more confidence, and then hopefully the R rate continues to stay low, and then will that be something that will give the business community confidence to then start to travel as restrictions allow?
Yeah, and actually it's interesting, talking about staycation. Why not a workcation, right? And not to give too much away, but I'm right now not in my office, and I'm not in Minneapolis. I am in Colorado. I'm in an Airbnb, and I've been here for a couple of weeks, and I have been working from somewhere else, and I'm interested to see if that is a trend that we will see more around the world as people are virtual. Why do they have to be? Obviously, there's a lot of hardship, and people have been furloughed and let go, and there's a lot of issues around budgeting and money and disposable spending. But are we seeing people just working from somewhere else and spending money somewhere else and sitting not at home or in an office, but sitting in another place? And I think it was Stephanie, she said she's going to be in Spain until the end of the year. I assume it's her own house, not an Airbnb. Otherwise, so that would be a big Airbnb
well, it's
budget,
her parents, actually.
Oh, it's her parents, right? But do we actually have to work from where we live, or can we work? We can work from anywhere. Not everyone can, but many of us can work from anywhere. And is that going to drive some demand, right? And how will hotels adapt to that? Will they be able to offer more workspace or more flexible arrangements? And will they be able to cater to that if somebody says, hey, I'm just going to work from somewhere else for the next couple of weeks?
I heard there was a couple of interesting ones. As the lockdown started, there were a number of hotel groups offering their hotel rooms as meeting rooms for people who wanted to get the hell out of home, so to speak. And then the other angle that I've sort of heard more recently is that companies, even such as ours, who got everybody distributed in their home offices, may want to actually meet up every Friday or every 2 weeks on a Friday for a meeting in circumstances. And there will be, I hate the expression, new normal in some ways, and hotels are going to have to adapt to that kind of environment, and let alone Airbnb as well.
Absolutely. It's just becoming much more flexible, right? And I think people have seen that they don't have to be going to the office every day, and they can work virtually. And companies have seen that it actually does work. And everyone talks about, we have made a technology leap that would have taken 10 years, and we've made that in 10 weeks. As we're all gone virtual, literally overnight. We've all had to deal with it, and companies had to deal with that, and they and we will see how that becomes maybe a longer term trend.
I'm going to end up with a final question then, Klaus, which I guess it's two questions is in one. One is, if I was, a revenue manager and my boss says, well, why do we need revenue management right now, given that, again, we don't have much data and we don't know how it's going to react? And that's quite part A of the question. Part B is, so I am a revenue manager. What would you recommend I be focusing on now?
The first question, you said we don't have a lot of data. I would argue we have a lot of data, and actually this is the time to look at more data than in the past. You're looking at more forward-looking data. You're looking at maybe more, rather than bookings. You need to understand what happens before bookings, right? What are people searching? What are people trying to do? What are people looking for? What are people searching in terms of airline seats, because that might be a leading indicator for what happens in the hotel business, right? So I think there's a need, and we see that with our clients and with the market. People are hungry for more data, not for less data right now, because they're trying to get an understanding of what's happening around the world. So the first answer would be, we need more data, not less data, and I need the right tool to allow me to ingest that data and turn that into decisions, right? So that would be my kind of a quick, and then we need that to create the right forecast and then the right pricing decisions, even in an environment where we only had 20%. So that's kind of the gist of my 30-minute speech earlier. From a revenue management perspective, I would look at everything that you've done in the past and see if that is still relevant, if it's still accurate, and don't think about how do we get back to February or January. Think about, are there opportunities now to restructure my business from a revenue management perspective? How do I use the new markets, the new competition, the new distribution landscape, and make that my advantage, right? What does that have? Are there market segments out there that I always wanted to have, but I never had time to go after, right? Are there pricing decisions I wanted to make, but I couldn't because I was locked into my previous structure? Are there distribution decisions I made that I always regretted, and now I have the time to revisit? There is a lot of things that people always say, oh, I wish I could do that, or I wish I could have done that. Well, now is the time to do it, because you have actually time to do it, and your revenue is small enough that if you make a mistake, it's not going to have a massive impact on your business. So be creative and be innovative and think outside the box. That's what I would say.
Fantastic. Klaus, we had a conversation quite a while ago about this Hangout, and I've got to say, absolutely perfect. Thank you very much. And I cannot believe an hour has disappeared in front of our eyes yet again on the Hangouts for Europe. Fantastic. So thank you very much indeed for that, Klaus. And I'm going to hand back to Victoria to close us down. Victoria.
Oh, thank you, Klaus, and thanks everyone for joining the Europe Hangout today. Before we close, remember that HFTP is hosting Hangouts every Wednesday at 3 p.m. UK time. Join us next Wednesday, July 1st, with Michael Grove and David Bailey of HotStats to review European trends and the state of play in Europe's hotels. What is the emerging view direct from the hotel profit and loss? Also, the Best of HFTP, including High Tech, the annual convention and club forum, is scheduled for October 26th through 29th, 2020 in San Antonio, Texas. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you again next week. This closes today's Europe Hangout.